I was never just a sister to Brenda. I was her protector, her safety net, the one who made sure she had everything she needed, even at my own expense. From the moment she was born, I took on a role no one assigned to me, but one I willingly embraced. Our parents did their best, but love doesn't pay the bills, and time was never on our side. So, I filled in the gaps. I tied her shoes before school, packed her lunches, stayed up late helping with assignments she'd forgotten until the last minute. And when it came time for college, I worked extra hours, took on jobs I hated, just to make sure she got her education without a single worry. Brenda never questioned it. Why would she? For her, this was just how things were. Deborah gives, Brenda takes. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Tuition, covered, rent when she fell short, paid without question. Even when she wanted vacations she couldn't afford, I made sure she never missed out. But gratitude? That word never seemed to cross her lips. Not once. A thank you would have been nice, just an acknowledgement that my sacrifices meant something. But Brenda had a way of moving through life untouched by the weight of what others did for her, and I let it happen. I told myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't about keeping score. I convinced myself that one day she'd see it. She'd look back and realize how much I had done, how much I had given up for her. But time passed, and that moment never came. Instead, I found myself fading into the background of her life, reduced to an occasional phone call, when she needed something. Forgotten birthdays, unanswered messages, updates about her new friends, her new life. A life where I had become nothing more than a distant memory. Then the final blow. I heard it from someone else. Brenda was getting married, a wedding, an event that brings together the most important people in your life. And me? I hadn't even been invited. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Surely she wouldn't do this. Surely, after everything, she wouldn't erase me like that. But when I confronted her, when I finally asked why, her answer was simple, cold, final. You're not important enough to be there. I don't remember what I said after that. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I do remember the feeling, the way my chest tightened, how my hands went numb, how the world seemed to shrink into a single, suffocating moment. Not important enough? After everything? After years of carrying her, of sacrificing, of making sure she never knew what struggle felt like? I stood there, staring at her, waiting for something. A laugh, a smirk, a flicker of regret in her eyes. But there was nothing. Just Brenda, looking at me with an indifference that cut deeper than any words ever could. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some misunderstanding or lapse in judgment. She meant it. Every syllable of it. That was the moment something inside me shifted. A part of me cracked, but not in the way you'd expect. There were no tears, no desperate pleas, no pathetic attempt to make her see what she had done. No, what I felt wasn't sadness. It was something sharper, something stronger. Clarity. I had spent my entire life believing that love meant sacrifice, that if I gave enough, if I proved myself enough, I would be valued. But that wasn't love. That was servitude. And standing there, looking at the woman I had spent decades protecting, I realized she had never once seen me as anything more than a convenience, a resource, a safety net to fall back on. Well, not anymore. I nodded once, as if I had just finished reading the last page of a book I should have closed a long time ago. And then I walked away. Not because I was defeated, not because I was broken, because I had made a decision. Brenda may have erased me from her life, but I was going to make sure she never erased what I had done for her, and I knew exactly where to start. The drive home was quiet. No music, no distractions, just the sound of my own breathing and the dull hum of the tires against the pavement. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they needed to, my knuckles stiff and white, but I wasn't angry. Not in the way most people would expect. I wasn't shaking with rage or fighting back tears. No, I was calm. Too calm. It was the kind of calm that settles in after a revelation, when all the noise in your head finally fades, and the truth stands in front of you, clear and undeniable. Brenda had never loved me, not in the way a sister should, not in the way I had loved her. And if she could cut me out so easily, if she could discard me like I was nothing, then maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to do the same. But I wouldn't disappear quietly. For years, I had been the one in the shadows, the one making sure she never had to feel the weight of reality. I had cleaned up her messes, paved her way, made sure she never had to suffer the consequences of her own selfishness. And what had that earned me? A cold dismissal. A reminder that in her world I was nothing more than a footnote. I wasn't going to beg for a place at her wedding. I wasn't going to demand an apology. But I was going to make sure she faced the truth of everything I had done, everything she had taken, and everything she had thrown away. And I was going to do it in the one place she couldn't ignore me. Her perfect day. The thought settled deep in my chest, not as bitterness, but as purpose. I wouldn't ruin her wedding out of spite. I wasn't here to destroy her life. But I would make sure that for once, for the first time in her charmed, oblivious life, Brenda would have to acknowledge me. And when I was done, I would walk away. Not broken, not empty, free. The wedding was flawless. Of course it was. Brenda wouldn't have settled for anything less. The venue was a dream. Ivory drapes cascading from the ceiling, golden chandeliers casting a warm, intimate glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. The scent of fresh roses and expensive perfume lingered in the air, blending with the faint melody of a string quartet. Everything had been meticulously curated, down to the last petal on the pristine white aisle. I stood at the entrance, watching. I wasn't a guest. I had made sure of that. No, I was something else, a presence she hadn't expected. The moment my heels clicked against the marble floor, the whispers began. Heads turned, murmurs rippling through the crowd like the first tremor of an approaching storm. I felt them, the glances, the stolen looks, the silent question hanging in the air. What is she doing here? Brenda stood at the altar, radiant, glowing, the center of a world she had built for herself. She laughed at something her groom whispered in her ear, oblivious, basking in the attention, in the perfection of it all. Then she saw me. Her smile didn't just falter, it collapsed. For a moment she was frozen, eyes widening, lips parting slightly as if trying to form words that never came. The groom, confused, followed her gaze, his brows knitting together at the sight of the uninvited guest standing at the back of the room. I didn't rush. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked forward, each step deliberate, controlled. I wasn't there to throw a tantrum. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to be seen. And she saw me. I could see it. The way her hands clenched just slightly at her sides. The way her perfect posture stiffened as if bracing for impact. She had spent months crafting this moment, weaving together every detail, every guest, every piece of her perfect narrative. And yet, here I was, standing at the edge of her carefully constructed world, unraveling it with nothing more than my presence. I wasn't dressed for a wedding, at least not as one of her guests. No floral pastels, no delicate lace, no soft, warm tones that whispered of celebration and joy. I wore black, sleek, simple, undeniable. A reminder, a shadow of everything she had buried. The whispers grew louder, rippling outward like a tide. I caught snippets of conversations as I walked past the rows of elegantly dressed spectators. Who is she? That's her sister, isn't it? I thought they were close. She doesn't look like she's here to celebrate. Brenda's fingers twitched, her carefully applied makeup unable to mask the sudden pallor in her face. She turned slightly, as if considering whether to run or confront me. I saw the silent debate flicker in her eyes. Ignore her. Pretend she doesn't exist. But we both knew better. I had existed in her absence for far too long. And today? Today, she couldn't pretend anymore. I stopped just before the altar, just far enough that I wasn't intruding, but close enough that there was no escaping me. The music had slowed, the energy in the room shifting, a collective breath held in anticipation. I tilted my head slightly, letting my gaze settle on her, waiting for her to speak. But she didn't. Because for the first time in her life, Brenda didn't know what to say. The silence stretched, thick and uneasy, pressing against the perfect walls of Brenda's perfect day. Her groom looked between us, his confusion deepening, his hand hovering slightly as if he wasn't sure whether to comfort her or demand an explanation. Around us, the guests had stopped pretending to be discreet. They were watching, waiting, their curiosity tinged with the unmistakable thrill of impending disaster. And still, Brenda said nothing. So I took another step forward, slow and deliberate, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. I could see it in her eyes now, anger, humiliation, fear. Not of me, but of the story I carried, the truth she had spent years burying. I let my gaze sweep over the guests, offering them the kind of measured smile that unsettles more than it reassures. Then finally, I spoke. I wasn't going to come, you know. My voice was calm, almost conversational, as if I were commenting on the weather. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the invitation got lost. Maybe you just forgot. I let the words linger, watching her swallow hard. But then I realized something. You didn't forget. You never intended to invite me, did you? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brenda's hands clenched into fists. And do you know what's funny? I continued, my voice steady. After everything I've done for you, after every sacrifice, I actually thought you'd want me here. I thought I mattered to you. A flicker of something crossed her face. Panic, maybe. A desperate need to control the situation before it slipped completely from her grasp. She took a breath, ready to speak, but I wasn't finished. You see, I said, shifting my attention to the room, Brenda and I have a history, a long one filled with love, sacrifice, devotion. I met her eyes, holding them captive. But love is a funny thing, isn't it? It should go both ways. I raised my chin slightly, waiting, giving her the chance to say something, to deny it, to fight back, to prove me wrong. She didn't. And in that silence, the damage had already been done. I reached for the microphone. Not in a dramatic, snatch it from the stand way. No. I took my time, my fingers grazing the cool metal, feeling the weight of it. Brenda's wedding planner, a jittery woman in an overpriced pantsuit, hesitated for a second as if she might intervene. But she didn't. No one did. Because this wasn't some drunken wedding speech gone wrong. This was something else, something heavier. Brenda stood motionless, her hands still clenched at her sides, her shoulders rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her groom, poor, oblivious man, was still trying to piece it all together. I could see the way his brows furrowed, the way his grip on her hand loosened ever so slightly. I tapped the mic once, just enough to command the room's full attention. I'd like to make a toast, I said, my voice even, unshaken. A toast to my sister. Brenda flinched. Brenda and I have been through a lot together, I began, my eyes scanning the guests, watching their intrigue shift into something else, unease. And I want all of you to know just how much I love her, how much I have always loved her. You see, family is about sacrifice. It's about showing up, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you something. And I have always shown up for Brenda. I turned my gaze back to her, watching as she took a tiny step back, like a cornered animal. When she wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it, I worked extra jobs to make sure she could. My voice was smooth, but each word landed like a brick being placed on an ever-growing wall. When she needed rent money, when she wanted things she couldn't afford, I never hesitated, never asked for anything in return. The murmurs started again, hushed voices passing judgment, guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Brenda's face was a war zone of emotions, fury, embarrassment, panic, but she said nothing. So, I continued. And yet, after all of that, after a lifetime of standing by her side, of making sure she never had to struggle, I wasn't even invited today. I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. Not a call, not a text, nothing. You know how I found out? I let my eyes settle on the groom now, watching his confusion morph into something closer to concern. Through someone else, a complete stranger knew my sister was getting married before I did. A ripple of gasps and low murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. I didn't need to see Brenda's face to know she was unraveling. And when I asked her why, I turned my attention fully back to her now, my voice quiet but deliberate. She said I wasn't important enough to be here. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind that pulls at the edges of a moment, stretching it until it snaps. Brenda opened her mouth, her eyes darting wildly around the room, as if searching for an escape, an excuse, anything. But there was nothing, because for the first time in her life, Brenda couldn't talk her way out of this. Brenda finally found her voice, but it was weak, barely above a whisper. "Deborah, please, not here." Not here, as if my pain had a designated time and place, as if my entire existence was an inconvenience she could schedule at her leisure. I let out a slow breath, gripping the microphone just a little tighter. "Not here?" I repeated, tilting my head. "That's funny, Brenda, because I don't remember you being concerned about where you dismissed me. You had no problem cutting me out of your life so cleanly, so effortlessly." She shook her head, her eyes wide, pleading. "It's not like that." "Then tell me what it's like," I cut in, my voice steady but sharp, because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like that's exactly what it is. Her groom stepped forward then, his hand resting lightly on her arm, his expression now twisted with uncertainty. "Brenda, what is she talking about?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked around the room as if hoping someone, anyone, would save her. But there were no allies left. No one was rushing to her defense. Even her closest friends sat motionless, eyes darting between us, waiting, listening. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. "You were supposed to be my sister. You were supposed to be family. And I spent my entire life making sure you never had to suffer, never had to struggle. But you didn't even think I was worth a phone call." Brenda's lips trembled, but I could see it now. That wall she had built so carefully was crumbling, brick by brick. "So tell me, Brenda," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying through the room like thunder. "Tell me how you justify this. How do you look at yourself in the mirror and pretend that what you did was okay?" She let out a shaky breath, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress. I didn't know how to tell you." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Oh, that's rich. You didn't know how to tell me? The same way you've told me every other thing you've needed from me? The same way you called every time you wanted help, or money, or a favor? But when it came to this, when it came to the one moment where I should have mattered, suddenly, you didn't know how to talk to me?" I took another step forward, my voice unwavering. Or was it just easier to erase me? Brenda's face crumpled, her carefully crafted image now in ruins. And for the first time in her life, she had no answer. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, her eyes flickering to the crowd, searching for an escape, a way to salvage what was left of her image. But there was no saving this, no rewinding, no deleting. The truth hung in the air, raw and exposed, settling over the pristine white decor like a stain that would never wash out. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of it, of me, of everything I had ever been to her, everything she had so easily cast aside. Then I took a slow breath and spoke again, my voice softer this time, but no less lethal. "You didn't erase me, Brenda. You erased the version of me that would have let you get away with it." Her breath hitched, her perfectly manicured hands trembling now. The guests sat frozen, eyes wide, riveted. Even the officiant had taken a step back, as if sensing that this was no longer a wedding, it was a reckoning. "I could have stayed quiet," I continued, my gaze never leaving hers. "I could have swallowed this, buried it, let you walk down that aisle and pretend I never existed. And you would have let me. You would have gone on with your life, smiling in your wedding photos, dancing under these chandeliers, never once sparing a thought for the sister who sacrificed everything for you." She flinched. But I want you to remember this moment, Brenda. I stepped even closer now, my voice a blade cutting through the silence. I want you to remember the way people are looking at you right now. I want you to remember the shame, the judgment, the realization that you're not the person you pretend to be. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing for them. Not now, not anymore. Because for the rest of your life, every time someone asks about your wedding day, this is what you'll think of. Not the flowers, not the dress, not the vows. I leaned in, just enough that only she could hear my final words. You'll think of me. Her breath shuddered, a tear slipping down her cheek. And just like that, the perfect facade cracked beyond repair. I straightened, stepping back, giving her space, not out of kindness, but because I had said everything I came to say. Brenda stood frozen, her breath shaky, her hands limp at her sides, as if the weight of the moment had finally settled on her shoulders. Around us, the air felt thick, charged with a discomfort no one knew how to break. I turned toward the guests, their expressions a mixture of shock, curiosity, and quiet judgment. Some looked down, pretending not to have witnessed the dismantling of Brenda's carefully curated life. Others stared openly, their eyes darting between us like spectators in a courtroom. Lifting my glass, I let a slow smile tug at the corner of my lips. Calm, composed, utterly unshaken. To my sister, I said, my voice smooth, unwavering. May she finally learn the value of the people who loved her before it's too late. The toast hung in the air like a final nail in a coffin. No one moved. No one clinked their glasses. The only sound was the soft clatter of silverware as someone, somewhere, set their fork down on porcelain. Brenda's lips parted, but no words came. I lowered my glass without taking a sip. Then, without another glance, I turned and walked away. The doors opened before me, the cool rush of air from outside hitting my skin as I stepped onto the polished stone steps. Behind me, the wedding carried on, but the illusion had shattered. The whispers would follow Brenda for years, an echo of the truth she had tried to bury. But that wasn't my concern anymore, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away feeling empty. I wasn't walking away in silence. I was walking away with dignity. The night air hit my skin, crisp and cool, washing over me like a quiet reminder. I was free. Free from expectation, from obligation, from the weight of carrying a love that had never been reciprocated. I descended the steps slowly, letting each moment sink in, letting the realization settle deep into my bones. Behind me, the murmurs grew louder, the hum of conversation turning into a low buzz of speculation, judgment, disbelief. Brenda's wedding, the day she had spent months, maybe years, perfecting, was ruined. Not because I had wanted revenge, but because she had built it on a foundation that could never hold. The valet approached, hesitant, his eyes darting toward the grand entrance as if unsure whether to acknowledge what had just happened. I met his gaze and gave him a small nod. "My car, please." As he hurried away, I glanced back toward the towering doors. A shadow moved just inside. Brenda. She hadn't followed me out, not completely, but she was watching. I could feel it. I could picture her standing there, her dress slightly wrinkled now, her makeup streaked, her carefully composed world collapsing piece by piece. For a fleeting moment, an old instinct stirred, the part of me that wanted to step back inside, to smooth things over, to take away the pain I had inflicted. But that part of me was dying, fading into the past where it belonged. This wasn't my mess to clean up. The valet pulled up with my car, stepping aside as I slipped into the driver's seat. My hands rested on the wheel, steady, unshaken. I didn't look back again. I didn't need to. Brenda would never forget this night, and neither would I. The engine purred softly as I pulled away from the venue, the glow of the chandeliers fading into the rearview mirror. With every mile that stretched between me and that ballroom, the weight on my chest grew lighter. I had spent years, decades, shaping myself into what Brenda needed. The fixer, the provider, the afterthought, but not anymore. I rolled down the window, letting the night air whip through my hair, cleansing, refreshing. I expected to feel guilt, or maybe regret, but there was none. Only relief. The kind that comes when you finally let go of something you should have released long ago. Brenda would spin her version of events, of course. She always did. Maybe she'd tell people I was bitter, unstable, jealous even. But the truth had already been spoken, and the people who mattered had heard it. The image she had carefully curated, the perfect, beloved bride, was cracked now, and cracks only ever widen. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message. I glanced at the screen, unsurprised by the name flashing across it. Brenda. I didn't open it. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for her to explain herself. I had all the closure I needed. I pressed down on the gas, the city lights blurring past me. For the first time in years, I was driving towards something that belonged to me, a future that was mine alone. And I wasn't looking back. The morning after felt different, lighter. For the first time in years, I woke up without the familiar weight pressing down on my chest. No obligations, no unspoken expectations, no desperate need to be seen by someone who had long since decided I was invisible. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle over me like a fresh start. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Brenda. Maybe she'd spent the night rewriting history, convincing herself I was the villain in her story. Or maybe, for the first time, she had actually seen herself for who she really was. Either way, it didn't matter. I reached for the phone, my finger hovering over the notification. Please, can we talk? I exhaled slowly. A few months ago, maybe even a few days ago, I would have jumped at the chance. I would have rushed to explain myself, to fix things, to make her feel better. But not anymore. I deleted the message without responding. Brenda would have to live with the silence she created. I got out of bed, stretched, and made my way to the kitchen, my steps unhurried, unrushed. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting soft golden streaks across the floor. It felt peaceful. Strange even. Like I had been holding my breath for years and only now remembered how to exhale. I brewed a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the space around me. No distractions, no incoming calls demanding my time, no emergencies that weren't mine to solve. Just me, my thoughts, and a quiet morning that belonged entirely to me. As I stirred my coffee, I glanced at my phone again. More messages, more missed calls. Brenda wasn't letting up. Deborah, please. Just talk to me. I didn't mean it like that. I don't want things to be like this between us. I set the phone down without replying, taking a slow sip. The taste was strong, a little bitter, but satisfying. She wanted to fix things now. Now that the damage had been done, now that people had seen her for who she was, now that she couldn't take back what she had said. But this wasn't something a quick apology could patch up, because deep down, Brenda wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry that I had finally stopped accepting it. By midday, the calls had stopped. The messages slowed. Maybe Brenda had finally realized that no matter how many times she reached out, I wasn't going to answer. Or maybe she was just regrouping, figuring out her next move, how to spin this in her favor. It didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting. I wasn't hoping. I wasn't begging to be chosen. I grabbed my bag and stepped outside, inhaling the crisp air. The world felt different, brighter, even though I knew it hadn't changed. I had. I wasn't Deborah, the giver. Deborah, the fixer. Deborah, the afterthought. I was just me, and that was enough. As I walked down the street, past people going about their day, I felt something unfamiliar bloom inside me. Freedom, the real kind, the kind that doesn't come from revenge or validation, but from release. Brenda would always be Brenda. She would find a way to explain away what happened, to push down the guilt, to twist the story so she came out looking like the wounded one. But I wouldn't be there to hear it. I smiled to myself, a quiet, satisfied kind of smile, and kept walking, toward my life, toward a future that for the first time in years truly belonged to me. and I never looked back.